Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander First Impressions, the series where we give our thoughts on upcoming Commander precons. My name is Grazzet, and as usual, we have my co-host and editor Kaprak joining us to weigh in on the recently released Death Toll Precon for Duskmourn. Okay Cap, we finally made it to the end, just one more to go. Are you ready to knock this one out?
Yeah, more or less.
Alright, then let's jump right into it.
Yeah, it's a Delirium-focused deck, so this can't be too complicated, but I do expect a broad spectrum of cards.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, it's Golgari, so this is probably going to do well.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with the Face Commander. So, Face Commander for the deck, Winter, Cynical Opportunist. 2 in Golgari, get you a 2/5 Human Warlock with Death Touch. Whenever Winter attacks, mill 3 cards, and a Delirium effect, which says, at the beginning of your end step, you may exile any number of cards from your graveyard with 4 or more card types among them. If you do, put a permanent card from among them onto the battlefield with a finality counter.
I'll alert the media that there's finally been a Golgari Reanimator Commander released.
Hey, this reanimates anything.
Yeah, that is an important distinction here. This hits creatures, enchantments, planeswalkers, artifacts.
Lands.
Yeah, okay. If you're doing this to a land, unless it's a combo piece, then you've got problems. But yeah, overall, this one's not bad. On attack, self-mill is going to get to that Delirium fairly quickly, depending on how the rest of the deck is built. Death Touch means that it's going to be able to get in, hopefully safely, because your opponents generally don't want to block a Death Toucher, especially if it's only dealing 2 damage, right? They'll just generally take the damage.
Yes, unless, it's added up too much because commander damage.
Yeah. And you can circumvent that by spreading your attacks around. Winter here doesn't care about who's being attacked.
And you don't need to attack for that last important part. And again, that does not say 4 cards. That's 4 card types amongst any number of cards. If you hit,
an artifact land, enchantment creature, artifact creature, that type of thing.
Yeah, if you just hit an artifact creature, that's 2 card types. Then you just do a land and an instant, and boom, you can get your artifact creature back.
Yeah, you can do this off 3 cards. You can do this off 2 cards if you get real lucky.
Yeah, that's a very narrow set of circumstances.
Yeah, but it is possible. And better to keep Delirium because you are going to be emptying your own graveyard to activate the Delirium effect.
It is worth mentioning. There is a very good argument for possibly running a few battles in this deck for that reason, and double-checking to make sure what kindred instants there are out there that might be fringe playable, because, hey, that's 2 card types.
Well, you're going to be talking about that shortly, but that's spoilers. So, yeah, let's go ahead and see what the other commander brings to the table.
The other one I've actually seen a lot of hype about, it is Rendmaw Creaking Nest. 3 in Golgari gets you a 5/5 artifact creature scarecrow with menace and reach. And whenever Rendmaw enters, and whenever you play a card with 2 or more card types, each player creates a tapped 2/2 black bird creature token with flying. Those tokens are goaded for the rest of the game.
Okay, this is a fun build around now, isn't it?
Yes.
Just because it's taking advantage of that multi-type card. So artifact lands, artifact creatures, enchantment creatures, that type of thing. That's fun.
A handful of kindred enchantments. Hey, we're playing Bitter Blossom up in here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this one's good. This one's fun. It's an overstated creature for the cost. It gets you more bodies on board. It gets everybody more bodies on board, but those bodies can't touch you until the 1v1.
But then you have a 5/5 with reach, and they're just birds.
Yeah, there are just 2/2s that are just going to fold to this, so ideally you've won the game way before then.
Thematically, the crows being afraid of you because you have the scarecrow just makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I do want to build around this one because you'd think that we don't have enough multi-type cards, but you'd be wrong because there are quite a few.
No, it's just every artifact creature. You just run as many artifact creatures as you want, and then everything else is just, let's see what we can get.
Artifact lands, we've got a decent selection of enchantment creatures. We'll find ways to get this guy online.
We will, but a handful of the things you were talking about are not good. I don't think the enchantment creatures have a ton of depth in Golgari.
I mean, there's Nyxweaver. It's a classic.
1.
That's better than 0. But yeah, these are both fairly good. The Face Commander's solid. The alternate commander is a fun build around and still probably stays in this deck just because there's probably going to be a decent number of multi-type cards in here.
And it's a good reanimation target.
Yeah, if this gets milled over, you can just bring it right back. And it procs 2 things because it itself is a multi-type creature, an artifact and a creature.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's good.
But yeah, no, both these commanders, relatively straightforward, but interesting enough to not be boring.
Yeah.
With that, let's head right into the other new cards here.
Yeah, let's see what other cards this deck brings to the table.
Our first new card off the bat is Ursine Monstrosity. 2 and a green, you get a 3/3 Bear Mutant with Trample. At the beginning of combat on your turn, mill a card and choose an opponent at random. Ursine Monstrosity attacks that player this combat if able. Until end of turn, Ursine Monstrosity gains indestructible and +1/+1 for each card type among cards in your graveyard.
Okay, so for 3 mana, we're getting a 3/3 trampling body.
Asterisk.
Yeah, okay, asterisk, yes. It is another source of self-mill that's just going to constantly happen at the beginning of combat on your turn, so that's fine. Random attacks, not as good, but generally we're playing this for the self-mill more than anything, and then because this thing just becomes gigantic as the game progresses.
Like, it always attacks as at least a 4/4 and has indestructible, so the attacks are mostly safe.
And realistically, this thing is going to be able to get to 7/7, 8/8 reasonably well, one would imagine, in this type of deck, because we're probably running a lot of different types of cards. At least a 7/7, right? Because we want to at least get to Delirium.
Yeah.
So 7/7 for 3, that sets up the rest of your game plan. We'll take that.
Yes. Up next, our next one is Demolisher Spawn. 5 and 2 green, get you an enchantment creature, Horror. 7/7 with Trample and Haste. And it has a Delirium effect. Whenever Demolisher Spawn attacks, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, other attacking creatures get +4/+4 until end of turn.
Okay, overstated green creature, check. 2 types to make better use of Delirium in this deck, check. Overrun style effect that cares about the graveyard, check.
It's not a true overrun, there's no trample here, but this has a haste, so it's Craterhoof adjacent. This is a great reanimation target. This is not going to win you the game like Craterhoof will. It does not give everything trample. It does not give a huge stat bump. But it gives a big enough one where it's probably going to force people to chump a lot of it.
I mean, even if this thing doesn't give trample itself, we have enough ways to do that in green in general that we're probably going to be running if we're reanimating stuff anyway. This is still a good enough imitation of Craterhoof and overrun style effects in general. I would consider it a finisher. I mean, at the end of the day, I like this one. I think it ticks all the boxes.
Oh, I don't dislike it. Just, there are better cards, but hey, this one's also an enchantment, so it's got that going for it.
Yeah.
There are very few new creatures in this deck, so let's go straight into our first sorcery, Deluge of Doom. 2 and a black, all creatures get -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. This is anywhere from a -0/-0, which is what happens when your graveyard gets removed in response to casting this, all the way up to Magical Christmas -9/-9.
Yeah. You know, I'm not too hot on this one because it is a mini wipe, realistically, right?
Yes. You're shooting for this to be like -3 or -4 in like the early mid-game when you already have some 5/5s out.
Yeah, because otherwise, this isn't really going to take control of the board if your opponents have multiple large threats, because they're just going to be able to weather the storm. And if you've gotten to the point where it's giving -9/-9 to the entire board, you're probably firmly in control of the game at that point. So this is not the best wipe in the world. I think there's even better graveyard-focused wipes in existence already.
Now, I will argue that there are worlds where you are getting that -7+, but it's super relevant. Because somebody wiped, and then somebody followed up with a ridiculous couple of plays because they have a ton of mana, and then somebody else did that, and now it's you, and you're just like, well, -8's useful here.
Yeah, I mean, there's niche cases, but I think we could do better. Not terribly impressed with this one.
It is better as wipe number 2 than wipe number 1.
Yeah, but it being conditional makes it less good as a wipe in general.
Up next, we have Formless Genesis. 2 and a green, gets us a Kindred Sorcery, the Shapeshifter type. This card has every creature type, if that's relevant to you. And you create an XX colorless Shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and Death Touch, where X is the number of land cards in your graveyard, and this has Retrace, which means you can discard a land to cast it again.
Okay, so first things first, does Changeling on it make it a creature in the bin?
No, this is not a creature in the bin. Changeling is not a thing that goes on just creatures. It just gives it every creature type.
Okay, this only counts as 2, not 3. Okay, I got excited there for a moment. But this is still a good card, right? We're still graveyard focused. We're going to be milling ourselves a lot. This gives us a way to get a land into our bin if we don't have one in there already because of Retrace. We can get continual value out of this in the mid to late game when we don't need our land drops. Just get more bodies on board. This is just going to be generally good.
Frankly, I'm also expecting to see this show up in a lot of green-based Kindred decks that have any degree of land interaction. For the niche player in me, this is going to slot into some Druid decks perfectly.
I mean, any decks that have a landfall theme that also function with the graveyard, Slugurk, he does a lot of stuff with the bin.
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the fact that this is just an extra, frog, or ooze, or druid, or elf, ? I don't think elves want this, but there's a lot of underappreciated tribes that are just happy to have another member.
Yeah, Overall, this one's going to be good here, maybe good in other decks. Overall, is a good card.
Yes. Speaking of oozes and the like, up next we have another sorcery, Convert to Slime. 3 in Golgari, destroy up to 1 target artifact, up to 1 target creature, and up to 1 target enchantment. Then, if you have Delirium, create an XX green ooze creature token where X is the total mana value of permanents destroyed this way.
Okay, so 5 mana gets you a 3-for-1.
And it's not even a 3-for-1 where you need the targets. If it's only a 1-for-1, it can be a 5 mana 1-for-1.
Yeah, that feels bad, though.
Yeah, but when you need removal, you need removal.
But realistically, you're at least going to be able to get 2 out of this. Creatures are going to be real common. Artifacts are going to be real common. Enchantments may be a problem every now and again on a board, but you generally will be able to just get 1, even if it's not that important.
Duskmourn is an enchantment set. We're going to likely see more enchantments see play.
Yeah. If you're playing in a pod that's just all of the precons, then yeah, you definitely have a target there since one's enchantment-based. And then the Delirium effect, which presumably we're going to be able to get online reasonably well, just gives us a huge body. On average, you're looking at like a 7/7, a 9/9 on average. That's assuming you're hitting 2 and 3 drops.
So, I am relatively sure that this is amazing for killing rooms.
Yeah. And then because rooms have the split cost that combine...
They are not traditional split cards. The mana value is whatever rooms are currently unlocked when they're on the battlefield.
Ah, okay.
So you will combine both, though I am curious and do want to see this card played out in like a digital format so it can do it for me to see if it checks while it was on the battlefield, in which it will only be whatever is unlocked, or if it's checking when it is in the graveyard, because I think this might be checking when it's in the graveyard, and when it's in the graveyard, it has both.
Yeah, it says destroyed this way, so the card does have to be destroyed first before it checks. But yeah, it's best to check. We'll put it here if we find the result.
Yeah, I'm not sure we're going to, but hey.
But this is a good card overall. Maybe a bit slow.
It's an expensive sorcery speed, slow piece of multi-targeted removal in Golgari. Stop the presses.
Okay, yeah, that's fair. What I don't like is the fact that we're running a lot of self-mill. We mill this over, there's no getting it back. Our commander can't get it back.
So it goes.
And it only contributes 1 type to Delirium, so maybe we have better options, but this is fine. As removal, it's fine. It's a 3-for-1, even if it is slow.
Moving on, our first of many enchantments, Into the Pit. 2 in a black. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may cast spells from the top of your library by sacrificing a non-land permanent in addition to their other costs. So the first thing, that does not say non-token.
Yeah, you can pitch tokens to this. Token decks are going to be able to go to town with this just to be able to future sight.
It's not full future sight. You still can't play lands from the top of your deck.
Yeah, that's true, but you're going to be able to play 66% of your deck off the top.
Yes.
So it is still very, very good. The cost is negligible for the vast majority of decks that want to run this, but that also brings into question, is this a deck that wants to run this? Because on one hand, it does give us a way to get perhaps hard to get permanent types into the bin. Theoretically, if we've got something like an enchantment in play, we haven't milled over an enchantment creature, we can sacrifice it to this and get a card for our trouble and then set up Delirium if we don't have it already.
Same thing for artifacts.
Yeah, so there's the justification there, but on the other side of the equation, once we've done that, do we really have enough fodder to sacrifice to this in order to justify that future sight style effect?
Maybe?
Now, in other decks that have plenty of fodder, just tokens up the wazoo, then yeah, this is just an auto-include, right?
We're in Golgari. I wouldn't doubt there's just some incidental token creation. But...
yeah, the alternate commander gives us extra tokens, so maybe there. But yeah, overall, this card's solid. Maybe not the best in this particular deck, but solid in the decks that have the spare tokens to feed it.
Yeah, no, it's an absolutely fine card. Again, I don't know if it's necessarily perfect here, just like you do, but I am not going to complain about having it in this deck because it's just good. Up next, Demonic Covenant. 4 and 2 black. Get you a Kindred enchantment that is a demon. Whenever 1 or more demons you control attack a player, you draw a card and lose 1 life. At the beginning of your end step, create a 5/5 black demon creature with flying, then mill 2 cards. If 2 cards share all their card types were milled this way, sacrifice Demonic Covenant.
Okay, this one's just good, right? This is just a self-contained draw engine because it turns itself on because it creates a demon. At minimum, it's going to give you a 5/5. It mills you, which is what we want to do for Delirium and for our commander and all that good stuff.
And then you sacrifice it.
No, you don't have to, because the clause here is it has to be the exact two. So if you hit an artifact creature and a creature, that's not the same two things.
But the concern is that you hit a land and a land, because land is going to be the section of your deck that has the least card type diversity and will also be the most dense.
Okay, that's true, but then we split things up with artifact lands. Then you hit a land and artifact land, that still doesn't match.
I think there's only 4? Hitting back-to-back lands is not common, but it's not so uncommon that it's unlikely.
Okay, so worst case scenario, you get a 5/5 demon with flying, an evasive body into play, you mill yourself 2, and then you still get a kindred enchantment into your bin to set up Delirium and set up your graveyard for later that we can bring right back with our commander.
Yes, but then if you sacrifice it again, it's gone for good because finality counters. Again, I don't think this is bad. This is good if you can manipulate your top deck in the slightest. The second you can start looking forward and going like, okay, so let me scry 2.
We're in Golgari. How are we going to do that?
Have you heard of this card called Sensei's Divining Top? It'll be your entire budget and your entire budget for a different deck, but it makes this card good.
I will alert the media. Sensei's Divining Top is good.
Oh no, I'll be frank. Sensei's Divining Top's not a good card. It's good when you're doing it with other things. On its own,
This is a good card in my opinion. It is good in this deck because we can make use of it in play, we can make use of it in the bin, we can bring it back because it's a permanent. It ticks all the boxes.
I think this card will see play in some demon decks, and maybe this one, and that's it.
This is an auto-include in demon decks because it can just start generating you card advantage immediately.
Yeah, no, in demon decks, this is 6 mana. Draw 3, get a 5/5. I think people would play that.
And if you can make use of your graveyard in any way, that's just gravy.
Well, lastly, we have the obligatory room card. Polluted Cistern and Dim Oubliette. Polluted Cistern, 1 and a black. Whenever one or more cards are put into your graveyard from your library, each opponent loses 1 life for each card type among those cards. Well, that's great. That's some nice reach for this deck.
Yeah, just gives us a little bit more ways to burn out our opponents.
And then Dim Oubliette, 4 and a black. When you unlock this door, mill 3 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Hey, look, a reanimation effect. 5 mana is not bad, but, it also mills you 3. And if you already unlock the Cistern, that's probably burning your opponents from somewhere between 1 to 4.
Yeah, it's not a bad card overall. Neither side is particularly impressive. The Polluted Cistern is arguably the better one. It doesn't really help our strategy in any capacity. It just gives us a bit more reach with our current strategy of self-mill. And Dim Oubliette, we're going to have probably creatures in the bin that we want back at a certain point, so we just keep that in reserve until we mill over something gigantic and then bring it out for 5.
Yeah, no, this is a good enough card in the decks that are going to want this kind of card. A 5-mana reanimation isn't great, but a 5-mana reanimation that is also a bunch of incidental life loss for your opponents, okay. Plus, again, permanent on the battlefield to sack later. I think that's something that people are forgetting about rooms, Eventually, sometimes you need to sack something for something that wants you to sack a thing, and boom, you can sack this.
Yeah, that's niche, though. Again, it ticks the boxes here because we can bring it back if we have to.
I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not sure if you know this, but when you reanimate a room, both doors are locked.
No, yeah, that's true. So then you have to start from scratch.
If you don't have a better option, you're not going to complain about it, but you still got to sink the mana in.
Yeah, it's serviceable. It's the best way to describe this.
But yeah, that is all the new cards for this deck. I don't think any of them are bad, just a lot of them are narrow, which makes sense because this is a very narrow deck.
That's true. Let's move on to the breakdown and see how the rest of this deck shakes up. All right, so looking at this deck's core stats, starting off with our ramp pieces, we have 16, which is higher than average. A surprising amount of that ramp coming from mana rocks for a deck in green, but that does make sense since we do want to have artifacts in our bin in order to trigger our commander's delirium, but it also has some more traditional green ramp sources alongside them, making it overall pretty solid.
Yeah, no, again, this deck needs an artifact count, so gotta put some rocks in.
Yep, that makes sense. Then moving on to our draw package, which is only 8 cards, which is a bit lower than average. It does have some generic draw sources like Night's Whisper and Harmonize, and some permanent-based ones we can quote-unquote reanimate with Winter if we mill over them, like the new Demonic Covenant and the classic Ob Nixilis Reignited. And while we are going to be getting a lot of value from our bin, it does feel like it's low enough that if we start falling behind in cards in our hand, it could be an issue.
Kinda. It's just, again, we're one of the kind of deck that gets so much advantage out of the graveyard that we do have, at least half of it is a second hand.
I'll agree completely that we do have a lot of ability to just off of our commander to recur value from our bin and just straight up reanimate resources from our bin. So yeah, testing is going to show whether or not this is going to be an actual problem or not.
And also, as much as I know you would like to remove a lot of the sorcery speed draw, yeah, leave a couple extra in just so you have a decent sorcery count.
True. Moving on to our removal package, 10 pieces here, which is an average number, but speaking of sorcery speed, there's a lot of it here. We do have 2 pieces of instant speed interaction in here, Inscription of Abundance and Putrefy, which are serviceable, but the rest is attached to much slower sources like Convert to Slime, Noxious Gear Hulk, Grist the Hunger Tide, which is definitely going to limit our ability to disrupt our opponents on their turns.
We are trying to hit that coveted, what was it again, 9 different permanent types in the yard, though?
Yeah, if we want to get the quote-unquote maximum value out of certain cards that care about our types in graveyard, maybe, but our deck's not really geared all the way into that, so typically 4 is enough, right?
Oh yeah, but I'm thinking about you gearing that up. You see, even though you only need 4, with a large enough variety, it makes it even easier for you to hit 4 as fast as possible. For example, if you culled all the Planeswalkers, yeah, you're still probably going to be able to hit 4 consistently, but it'll make it a little harder.
But you're sacrificing a better graveyard setup for the ability to disrupt your opponents, which could be the difference between you being able to stop your opponents from winning or not. So that is kind of a little bit of a balancing act.
Well, if you want to talk about disrupting the opponents, you have your last category.
Yes, we do have our wipes, which are 2, which is an average number, but the quality on these is somewhat lacking because the only 2 we have here is Deluge of Doom and Culling Ritual.
I will argue that Arachnogenesis is at least partially a wipe.
Arachnogenesis is a fancy fog, generally.
It is a fog, but it is a fog that's going to likely 2 or 3 or 4 for one the opponent. Actually, not even for when you spent the card, but you still keep the spiders.
While it does help us build up our board, it doesn't really help us wipe the board in the event that our opponents aren't attacking us or the board is just getting out of control with combo pieces, that type of thing.
It's not a wipe that resets from a neutral state, but it can be utilized as like half a board wipe.
It's a good card, but I wouldn't throw it in this category. Long or the short, I believe this particular category does need a lot of improvement because we're going to have a hard time taking control of the board if stuff gets out of control with these 2 as our only options. Now, moving on to the game plan proper, 20 self-mill sources, which is serviceable, but is a bit low. Gimmick-wise, I like to see 25 to 30 pieces, and our commander isn't the most reliable source of self-mill. They don't really set up our graveyard all that well, so I think maybe this isn't quite enough. What do you think, Cap?
I think the issue is a lot of self-mill is going to be on instants or creatures. And again, requiring a diverse base means you cannot go so deep into the gimmick without losing the other gimmick.
Yeah, you could be right. There is that balancing act that you have to go ahead and make sure that you have enough pieces, but not enough that you're overfilling your graveyard when you don't have enough to make use out of it. Yeah, I can see that.
You want good amounts of self-mill, but you don't want so much self-mill that you're just milling self-mill.
Fair. Moving on to another way to set up our graveyard, 9 effects that either sack themselves or other creatures, which help supplement the self-mill. That brings it up to, 29 ways to set up your bin. Since this deck isn't entirely concerned about self-mill per se, it just wants to fill up your bin.
Yeah, it does not necessarily need a mass of cards. It needs the specific cards that you need at the time.
Yep, exactly. And this helps us get that if we have to, for example, hard cast something and then sacrifice to get into our bin, or we just have things that we can sacrifice for value, that'll definitely help us pad that graveyard up to get Delirium online.
Like, frankly, with enough diversity in the deck, things like Grapple with the Past or Grizzly Salvage should just be able to go, okay, this turns on Winter for something I would like to bring back regardless.
Yeah, man, speaking of variety, we actually have 16 cards in here that have multiple types, which is going to make getting that Delirium and Graveyard set up a lot easier.
Not enough. I'll argue for that one. That one needs to be ramped up.
I mean, I don't think we need to go all in. We're not trying to enable the alternate commander here with this. We just need enough to get Delirium online.
Well, yeah, but remember, Winter removes the cards from your graveyard. You're going to be exiling them.
Yeah.
So, in a perfect world, what you want to do is, burn a land, an instant or sorcery, and then an artifact creature or an enchantment creature you want to bring back. You want to burn 3, and if you can burn 2 for some very specific, very difficult to hit combinations, then yes, you do that. But we don't want to be burning 4 cards every time, because that is going to burn through our graveyard real fast, and we're going to have to start making hard decisions.
I mean, I'd argue for the fact that you just leave the multi-types in your graveyard unless you want to bring them back and just burn the chaff. Since at the end of the day, you don't need that many cards in your bin if you have enough multi-types to meet the requirements.
Well, the question is, and I think this is a good segue, how many Delirium payoffs actually are there?
There are a total of 8 Delirium payoffs, but outside of Delirium, we actually have 20 more Graveyard Matters payoffs. So, Delirium specifically, a little bit low. Full disclosure, Delirium does not have a lot of support, and those payoffs are not particularly good. Even the new ones.
There's some decent ones in the new one. All the scarecrows. Beautiful.
But the Graveyard Matters makes up for it, because again, we have 20 pieces on there, which gives us a solid number of payoffs for the self-mill side, the sacking side, which help us generate value, which help give us stronger creatures, and overall just help improve the quality of the deck by playing from our bin. So again, your standard Golgari graveyard shenanigans.
Fair enough. I'm trying to keep this deck on theme and not just turn it into a good old-fashioned Reanimator deck.
Well, I mean, speaking of reanimation, we actually only have 6 reanimation pieces, including our commander. So we're not full-blown Reanimator, where that number would be a whole lot higher.
Honestly, if you can hit them consistently, aka your commander, that's enough to just be it.
I mean, sure, but if you're just relying on Winter to bring your stuff back, you're going to be burning through your graveyard real fast.
Fair enough.
And while on topic of reanimation, we have 10 quote-unquote reanimation targets in the deck, and what I mean by that is CMC 6 plus permanents that Winter specifically can bring back, and that includes some entrants with big ETB effects or impressive static abilities, some big enchantments, which I think you had your reservations about this being a full-blown Reanimator deck. Do you think that's enough, or do you think that's not going enough into the gimmick to get the maximum value out of Winter if we don't have enough big things to reanimate or cheat into play?
Oh no, I definitely think it could use a few more big things, but specifically a few more big things that go a little bit of everything. Like throw in a few giant artifact creatures in here. You can't complain about that.
Yeah, artifact creatures make sense just to help get Delirium online, and maybe a handful of other multi-type finishers just to, again, help enable the gimmick. Yeah, I can see padding that number being beneficial just so we have reliable ways to close out the game. But yeah, that's the end of the breakdown, so I guess it's on to you, Cap, and the reprints that you found interesting in this deck.
Okay, so I think it's pretty obvious I'm going real hard on the multi-typal cards. I think they're real interesting and allow us to super minimize the number of things that we're doing. So obviously Dryad Arbor. Dryad Arbor is such a weird, niche, little piece of insanity that it's hard not to love.
I mean, it's a creature that's also a land, so that's 2 right there for our purposes. And it does also a bunch of other miscellaneous stuff in other decks, but we're primarily running it for the gimmick here, right? The multi-typal gimmick.
Yeah, we're running it here just because, if we want to get an artifact out of the bin, this is a great thing just to, get rid of. Sacrificing it to things in the mid to late game's fine to tick those numbers up. Dryad Arbor, Mindstone, Planeswalker. Boom, I get a Planeswalker back.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's not a bad card overall. I don't think this deck is the best place for it. Generally, this goes mostly in lands decks, right?
Kind of. It's weird. It also goes in stupid combo decks.
Yeah, fair. It certainly earns its spot here at any rate just because of the multi-type it brings to the table. So 2 for the price of 1, sure, sign me up.
Yeah, no, it's real hard to complain about it. It's an absolutely fine and, frankly, a little bit fun card. Secondarily, I mentioned Planeswalkers. I just like Wrenn and 7. I think it's more of a lands card, but it fuels your graveyard enough, and it's just doing just enough. And also, if you ever do get to alt Wrenn and 7, it's also really good in this deck. It is a reanimation piece.
Yeah, that's true. I'm hesitant on mass reanimation in this deck in particular because we are going to be burning through our graveyard, so that could be a non-bow, or at least make it less efficient than it possibly could be in a full-blown Reanimator deck, but it's still fine.
No, that 0 can get you to high levels of mana really fast and just go, well, okay, I guess we don't need to reanimate things.
I mean, sure, but if we're going to make maximum use out of that 0, we're going to need to get our draw higher.
Well, that's what the +1's for. You see, I flood out so hard so often that, anything that feels like flood protection always feels good. But yeah, moving on. Lastly, and again, I bring this up because it's in that weird liminal space between 2 things. It's Whip of Erebos. Also, I will advocate strongly and endlessly for the Bow of Nylea to be in this deck for the exact same reason, because this is an enchantment artifact.
True. Again, another repeatable reanimation piece. It is temporary reanimation, mind.
And it exiles. No. I'm advocating for Whip of Erebos because it just counts as 2 card types and the lifelink is nice. The repeatable reanimation's cool, and this does have the real fun ability for you to go Whip of Erebos, Dryad Arbor, bring back Whip of Erebos. You only have to exile a single card that way.
Sure, I didn't think of that.
And who cares if there's a finality counter on your Whip of Erebos?
Yeah, I mean, that's not going to be the easiest thing to get rid of.
Again, same with Bow of Nylea. This hits artifact and enchantment at the same time, which is, I think, just that one cycle. So you're going to want it so you can go Whip of Erebos. Like, sometimes late game, Whip of Erebos, instant creature, you're going to get Whip of Erebos back because you need a lifelink. Sometimes you're going to go Whip of Erebos, instant creature, and bring that giant creature back because it instantly wins you the game.
Yeah, my only concern about Whip of Erebos is, again, the fact that we are chewing through our graveyard makes repeatable reanimation pieces not as good. And this one chews through your graveyard even more because, again, you're not getting that creature back, and we have no way to circumvent that exile clause in this deck. I don't think Golgari has any way to do it. But yeah, I mean, it's a good reprint.
Well, you're leading me into a tangent that you asked for. You know what's really good in these decks? Or in this deck specifically?
Enlighten me.
Have you ever played Food Chain Combo?
No, and we can't afford Food Chain.
Because it's expensive. But we sure can play Eternal Scourge.
Oh, this is the Eldrazi that you can play from exile.
Yep.
I mean, but why?
Well, we exile it from our bin, and then recast it. We can repeatedly exile this thing from our graveyard with Winter.
Yeah, and then just keep getting it back. You have to get some way to get it into the bin, which we have 9 ways to do it.
It's a 3/3. Just block.
Yeah, that's fair. Sometimes your opponents aren't going to be attacking you, though, and then you're stuck with a 3/3 that's a vanilla 3/3 for all intents and purposes.
Cool. Maybe they'll accidentally target it and it'll get exiled. That second clause makes this card not good. That first clause makes this card very playable.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this would be a bad include here, but I think we need more ways to sack things continuously from play just to get more mileage out of him and be able to reliably use him as exile fodder from the bin to fuel our commander.
You seem to have gotten bored with discussing this deck.
I mean, we're talking about Golgari Reanimator here.
It's not, though. It's Delirium.
No, actually, no. We're talking about Golgari Self-Mill. This is a deck that I have built into the ground. We have built this in so many flavors.
But it's not Delirium.
It is, okay, Delirium's bad. I hate to break it to you, but Delirium is not a good mechanic, not because it's not a unique mechanic, because sure, getting multiple types of things into the bin sounds fun. All the payoffs are terrible. We've got Deathcap Cultivator in here. The Delirium payoff is it gets Death Touch. It's a 2/1 mana dork that gets Death Touch. How is that relevant for us? Grimflayer gets +2/+2.
Grimflayer is amazing. Do not understate that card. It is beautiful.
No, the long and the short of it is, we don't have great Delirium payoffs. Well, this deck is being held up by all our Graveyard Matters payoffs, not Delirium specifically.
I'm also not arguing that Grimflayer is good because of the Delirium. I'm arguing it's good because of the block of text on there.
Yeah, the self-mill aspect.
The Surveil 3, yeah. It has been errata to be Surveil.
I mean, it's not a bad effect, but it, again, is a 4/4 with Trample that has to get in for
2
damage.
mana!
Yes,
2 mana!
It does not matter. This thing can get multi-blocked. This thing can die easily. A 4/4 stat block that can get in for damage reliably once is not what I'm looking for in this deck. There's a lot more passive ways to set up our bin than this. I'm not bored with this deck. Golgari is near and dear to my heart. I love graveyard focus decks. I love Reanimator style decks. Golgari ticks both of those boxes. It's just that this deck doesn't seem to be doing anything particularly unique.
No, I think is this our first Delirium commander?
Well, there may be other legendary creatures that have Delirium, but this one may be the only one that actively sets up your bin, so it is graveyard focused as well. Because I think we have the spider. Ishkana?
Ishkana, yes. In the deck.
Yeah, but Ishkana probably shouldn't be in this deck.
Somebody hates spiders.
It is a 3/5 that just gets us 3 tokens when it comes into play. Does that twice if we reanimate it with our commander, and then never again.
I never said it was you. It's me. I'm the one who hates spiders.
Oh, well, that's fair. I'm being negative here on this one. What do you think?
I think it's an absolutely fine deck that can use a little bit of a tune-up to get a little bit more interesting and diverse.
I'm not too enthusiastic about this one because I think once I get my hands on this and upgrade it, it's just going to look like your standard Golgari self-mill deck. It's not going to be bad, but I don't think it's going to be treading any new territory.
I think you can make it interesting, but you're refusing to.
I can only do what I can with the tools I am given. If the framework says this is a duck, I can't change it into any other type of bird. It has to be what it is.
We can pretend it's a goose.
we'll see what I can do. But yeah, that is, I guess, our final take on this particular deck and wrapping up the Duskmourn precons. But let us know, as usual, what you folks think. Is there anything here that you particularly enjoyed, or do you agree with my take here that I'm, again, not too hot on this one, or Kaprak's take of being a bit more optimistic? Otherwise, yeah, this has been Grazzet.
And I'm Kaprak.
And have a good one, folks, and stay safe.